Welcome, everybody, to the StoneCastle Investment Management Friday Cannabis Market Update. I'm here with Bruce Campbell, Portfolio Manager of StoneCastle Investment Management. Bruce, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's Cannabis Disappointment Week.
Well, it's Cannabis Disappointment Year, if you ask me. I don't see any reason to be excited about cannabis, though. So let's jump right in here. The Center for Diseases Control came out and identified vitamin E acetate as the culprit in the vape injuries that have been occurring and resulting in death in some cases. Do you think that's the only problem?
Well, certainly it might not be the only problem, but that's one of the ones that they've isolated at this point in time. And if you go back, remember, probably 6 weeks ago now, when the sector was selling off, there was a lot of concern about what this meant for the sector, whether or not vapes were even going to be allowed in Canada. And there was, a lot of swirl around this. The extraction companies sold off. The companies that had vapes in the U.S. sold off. And really, those companies were really pointing their fingers, saying, like, we think it's some of the additives that are in the black market product. And that's so far what the Center of Disease Control has come out and been able to isolate. So it should mean, if that's actually the case, then we should see pick up again from consumers.
Okay, well, let's hope so, especially for those whose business is solely focused on vapes.
Yeah, they've been hurt the most.
You bet. Let's talk about Cresco Labs and Origin House. The market anticipated they're going to reprice their merger transaction so that shareholders in Organogram will receive 0.84 of a Cresco share. They were going to get 0.84. Now they're going to get 0.7.
That's right. Yeah. So this isn't, this is something that we talked about previously. I don't know if it was last week or the week before, about the fact that, this deal in particular looked like it was going to be repriced because the Origin House stock just kept drifting lower, and the gap on the spread was widening out. And in fact, that's what we saw happen, is that, with all the sell-off in the sector, Cresco was able to go back to Origin House and say, you know what, this just doesn't work at this price, so we need to bring down the numbers, and they did. And I mean, that's a fairly substantial haircut to what investors were going to be getting with where they were before, especially considering that Origin House and Cresco have both sold off in price as well.
Sure. Do you think, from where you sit, are you a shareholder of either company, first of all?
We're not right now, no. Oh, actually, we are. We own a little bit of Cresco. We don't own much. We just own a small little position of Cresco, yeah.
Okay. So as a shareholder, would you have rather seen them delay the merger rather than reprice it at this level, or are you happy?
Well, if you look at the assets that Origin House has in California, I mean, they're fairly strong assets. And so, I think it's important to try to get in there and build that before, you really see that black market taken away. That's what the state's working on. And so with what they have, I think it makes sense. They were able to reprice it. They got a better deal on the assets, given the market conditions. They would have been happy with it, either way, I would imagine, especially when you look at it, probably a couple years down the road. But if you can get something cheaper, it always makes more sense, right?
Sure. Who doesn't like a discount?
Yeah.
Okay. The IIPR US REIT did a sale and leaseback with Green Thumb Industries. What's that all about?
Yeah, I mean, Innovative Industrial is a New York Stock Exchange listed REIT that's been focused on the cannabis sector. And what they're doing is, they're buying properties from different MSOs and LPs down in the U.S. and then basically leasing it back. And I mean, there's been a lot of talk of the source of funds, whether or not these MSOs are going to be able to raise more money, because of course they need a lot of money to continue to expand out. And we've seen this in Canada as well. There's lots of concern about, whether or not these companies are going to be able to continue to fund their operations. This is something that we've seen. We saw one trend, which was, if you go back a few years ago, we saw all the LPs raising cash to go and turn around and buy their buildings, because originally they were leasing them. And I suspect you'll probably start to see that unwind and go the other way. Where they're going to sell the buildings to something like a REIT, like Innovative Industrial, and then they'll lease them back. And that's, in this case, it was I think it was $40 million that they did with GTI. So it's a fairly substantial amount of money that they end up getting. They obviously give up the ownership of their building, but but they get cash.
Right. Okay, that's probably good for GTI shareholders. They'll be able to build some value with that cash theoretically.
Yeah, I mean it's good for innovative industrial as well. I mean they pay a dividend and they trade on the New York Stock Exchange and they just keep building out their portfolio.
Okay, and New Brunswick has made an announcement in regard to their cannabis infrastructure. And tell me what is happening with New Brunswick.
Well, they have 20 stores and then obviously their distribution network, and they've been losing money. And so what they said is, as opposed to us losing money, which is taxpayers' money, we want to sell this and let somebody in the private sector take it over. And they specifically cited the difficulties with Health Canada as one of the reasons why they wanted to do this beyond, sort of losing money. I think it's probably, it's interesting because if you were to come in there and you have, if you have access to capital, you're going to go in there and be able to buy an asset that really probably gives you a bit of a monopoly in New Brunswick. And it's going to take a little time probably to turn it around. But if you, like I said, if you have that capital, now you're going to have a monopoly. So I was a little surprised to see that they were doing it, but I guess they're probably taking pressure from taxpayers with the fact that it's costing them money.
Right. Amazing. I don't know too many drug dealers who have lost money selling drugs.
Yeah, only a government can do that.
That's right. They shouldn't be in the business in the first place. Okay, now let's talk about some of these earnings we've seen this week. The one bright spot that I saw was MediPharm Labs, who, reported some earnings as opposed to dramatic losses. And but everywhere else is disappointment. So let's start with the 800-pound gorilla in the room, Canopy Growth Corp. That was quite the shocker for me. How about you?
Yeah, it was, and I mean, obviously the street was shocked too. You saw the way the stock sold off on Wednesday, when they announced their numbers. It took everything down in the entire sector, and people are taking a look now and really concerned about how long it take for these companies to actually be profitable.
Yeah, no kidding. And Aurora?
Yeah, Aurora was the same way. I mean, obviously it wasn't the same shocker that we saw with Canopy because of the Canopy news. The big thing with Aurora was the fact that they're going to shut down or stop construction of two of their facilities. The first is their Nordic facility in Denmark, and then the second is their Sun facility in southern Alberta, which was a bit of a surprise. I mean, they've obviously earmarked a lot of money for this, but what they've said is that they haven't said they're never going to complete those. They've just said that at this point in time, we're not going to do that because we want to save capital. And once the global market expands, then at that point in time, they'll go in there and start the construction back up again. And actually, the Sun facility, they did say they're going to run 6 grow rooms there. So the interesting thing that came out of their earnings, though, was their a couple things. One was their cash cost. They actually have it down pretty low. It's 85 cents per gram, which is, I think, the only one lower would be Village Farm. And then the other significant piece there was beyond the cash cost was their adjusted sale price, which was kind of in the fives, right? So yep. That continues to come down and is kind of interesting as well.
Sure. Village Farms also an earnings disappointment.
Yeah, I mean they missed their numbers. A lot of their numbers though had to do with the fact that they had to sell wholesale because they didn't have the proper licenses that they needed in that quarter in order to do it, and so they got a significantly lower price. So they got around $2 per gram, and interestingly enough, they were still they still did fairly well. It's just the numbers were a lot lower than the previous quarter because they had to do it that way, and they also with their partner they hadn't received the full payment that they were expecting. But the interesting part with them was that their selling cost, or their average, not selling cost, but their production cost was in the 62 cents, which, shows you that if they have, a real price competitive market, they will, in the $2 range, they can still make a nice margin on that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. And Vivo, selling price, their average selling price was $7.15. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah. The one thing I kind of took from that is that, there is going to be this premium market. If you compare that to what Village Farms sold theirs for in the twos, these guys are getting $7.50 a gram, and because it's premium product. And so if this premium product really does get a higher price, there's going to be a lot of niche, smaller LPs that are able to generate, fantastic margins, because even if it costs them, sort of $2 to grow it, they can sell it for $7.50. That's great margin.
That sure is. Wonder why they're able to get such a high price.
Well, they were saying it's just because it's craft and it's, it's unique, and they probably have strains that are a little bit different, and then also the quality. If you compare a small indoor facility to one of the mass greenhouses, from everything that I've been told, the quality is way better in an indoor facility where they have so much more control over the environment.
Okay, well, that's great. Bruce, we're going to leave it there for now. We'll come back to you next week for, again, the StoneCastle Investment Management Cannabis Market Update. Thanks for joining me.
Have a great weekend.